Good morning, Saturday, the 15th of August, 2020. Pastor Ron Jetter, Immanuel Lutheran Church, Grandview, Washington. Enjoying a couple of cooler days as it now heats up. It's supposed to get up to possibly 108 or 110 in the next few days. Wow. And then maybe by the end of the month it'll cool off. We've had a couple of cool mornings, but getting back to nights in the mid 60s when it just doesn't feel like it cools off, because it only gets into the 60s for a few hours during the really hot days, and then it's right back into the 70s, 80s, 90s, and poof, the thermometer then goes over the top. I hope you're having as much fun with the book of Genesis as I am, because this book sets up the stories that every Jewish child knows by heart. The stories of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These are the stories of their faith, the stories that they wrestle with, the stories that they learn by. They learn who God is. They learn who they are in relation to God. As a rabbi friend of mine once said, I see myself as a link in a chain going clear back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have received the faith of God's covenant from Abraham all the way down through my grandfather to my father to me, and I now pass it on to my daughter and to my son, and hope that they will pass it on to their children in an unbroken line. They really see the faith as something that goes through the family, through the lineage, through that family tree. And if you have been following, the family tree here is getting crisscrossed. Here's Abraham, and over here his brother Nahor, and now here's Nahor's granddaughter Rachel married to Abraham's son Isaac, and Rachel's brother Laban is going to be a herdsman himself, and Laban's going to have some daughters, and Isaac's going to have a son. And I'm getting ahead of the story, but so here's Rachel here's Rebecca, married to Isaac, and they are first cousins once removed, and Rebecca's brother has daughters who are eligible to be married to Jacob. And do they still want it to stay in the family? Because now, I don't know what that relation... Boy, I need someone who's good at this ancestry stuff to put this on a piece of paper and figure out what these relationships are going to be. But we got to get there, don't we? Chapter 25, we have stories that further the Abraham saga, taking it on into Isaac's story. We have details about Abraham's life after Isaac's marriage. Chapter 25, verses 1 through 6, for instance, talk about Abraham's second wife, Keturah, and verse 2, she bore him Zimram, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. So from their other 6 boys, and we don't know how many daughters, they don't get named. That's the way it was then. But of these 6 boys, then, there are tribes. And so Isaac has lots and lots of stepbrothers and cousins and so on. But it says, Abraham, verse 5, gave all he had to Isaac. But to the sons of his concubines, and what about the other wife? Where'd these concubines come from? Well, Abraham gave gifts while he was still living, and he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the east country. So I don't get it. Was Keturah among the concubines and he married her, but he still had others? And it doesn't say. It's very confusing. And that's how these stories often are. We don't know where they came from, how they got written down, but they weren't especially concerned with that. They simply wanted to know that Abraham had a life after he was widowed. And then he died at the age of 175, which is what we get in verse 7. He breathed his last and died in a good old age. A good old age, my goodness. An old man full of years, I guess. And then he was buried next to his wife in the place in the cave at the end of the field that he had gotten from the Hittites. It said Isaac settled at Beer Lahai Roi, where he had met Rebekah. He was farming there or herding there, and Rebekah had come with the camels and the servants. And by the way, Rebekah brought along maids and servants and so on. She didn't travel alone. She had her own entourage. And Abraham and Sarah apparently had separate tents. That Sarah had a tent, and Isaac and Rebekah occupied that tent. Then we get into verse 12, where it talks of Ishmael's descendants. Oh, by the way, it does say that in verse 9, I forgot that, his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave. Well, wait a minute. Let's go back to chapter 22. Abraham, take your only son, Isaac. And now, a few chapters later, his sons, Isaac and Ishmael. And again, this really illustrates that these different traditions really were only focused on certain things. The one tradition focuses on the covenant between God and Abraham, Abraham to Isaac, Isaac to Isaac's son, and they're not concerned with any of these other details. But now the ancestry person is saying, well, we want to make sure that Abraham's full story, because it's going to go in his obit. Well, forget the obit, says the people concerned with God's covenant with the people, Abraham and his descendants. And then, of course, there's the people, the ritual people who get their stuff in every so often. Well, finally then, after we get through with what happened to Ishmael and all of his many, many descendants, verse 19. These are the descendants of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah. Okay, we knew that he was in his late 30s. Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean of Padan Aram, sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. What is with it? First Sarah can't have a child, and now Rebekah can't have a child. And the Lord granted his prayer. Why is it always the women that gets blamed when they can't have kids? He prayed, the Lord granted his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, if it is to be this way, why do I live? So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The elder shall serve the younger. Maybe Abraham wasn't the oldest. After all, Ishmael was older than Isaac, and the promise of God, the covenant with Abraham, went not to the firstborn, but to the secondborn, to Isaac. And already we have this prophecy from God to Rebekah. There's 2 nations within you. The elder shall serve the younger. But they're twins. The elder by what? 6 minutes? You want to talk about setting up a conflict? Verse 24, when her time came to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. We already knew that. The first came out all red, his body like a hairy mantle. So they named him Esau. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand gripping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. Okay, so Rebekah was barren for 20 years then. We don't know how old she was. She could have been maybe 15 to 20, so now she's 35 to 40. Verse 27, when the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man living in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he was fond of game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And here's the story, the plot thickening. Once, when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was famished. Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff, for I am famished." Well, probably beans, lentils, something like that. Therefore, he was called Edom. Jacob said, "First sell me your birthright." Esau said, "I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear it to me first." So Esau swore it to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew. Now we find out it is red lentils. And he ate and drank, and he rose and went his way. Then Esau despised his birthright. Despised meaning he gave it away. He counted it as nothing. So what is a birthright? Well, it means firstborn. And boy, that's a conversation for next week, isn't it? Think about that over the weekend, and I'll see you tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, live Word and Sacrament Zoom worship. Next week, firstborn. Do we still favor the firstborn today? We still defer to them today?